Hello and welcome to PFF Fantasy Football Podcast. I'm your host, Ian Hartitz. Happy championship week. You know, it's kind of weird. We got the NFC, AFC championships. There's a Super Bowl and there's a fantasy championship, so we can use this a lot of times. But either way, we just experienced probably the best 4 games of football any of us have ever seen, maybe in the history of the world, and hopefully we have some more on the way. So goal of today's podcast, I want to break down some of the key usage takeaways from the 4 remaining teams. That shouldn't take longer than 10 or so minutes. Then we're going to dive into just a quick little preview of the running back free agency landscape. Myself and our featured guest co-host, whatever the hell you want to call him, has also done plenty of work on the subject recently. Well, yeah, man, I don't know. I lost it. There's the freaking great intro. Dwain McFarland, everyone. You knew it was him anyway. How are you, Dwain?
Man, I'm good. I like being a featured co-host.
We'll work on it. I don't know.
Hey, it's championship weekend.
Person,
it's championship weekend, man. Like, let's just do this.
Let's just freaking do this. Wise words from The Rock himself. All right, Dwain, usage. We got the Bengals. It's as straightforward as they come. Tyler Boyd, Jamar Chase, and T. Higgins play almost every snap. So does CJ Uzomah. Yes, Joe Mixon doesn't quite have the 3-down, 90% snap role that us fantasy fiends would prefer. But at the same time, he's playing 70% plus snaps. He got 14 of the 15 backfield carries, 7 of the 9 targets. Out of all these situations, Dwain, I think the Bengals are the most cut and dry. They have their playmakers. They get them the ball, and that's that.
Yeah, for sure. I think the tricky one right now is like Uzomah just being more involved has really kind of diluted things. Now there's like 4 guys involved. The positive, though, is like the Bengals are throwing the ball more. Like, they're dropping back to pass the ball more than what they were earlier in the season. But we're just not getting like the full-on like effect we want from that, because we want that to all funnel to like T. Higgins and Jamar Chase. But right now you're seeing Boyd be plenty, or not Boyd, but Uzomah be plenty involved. And that's kind of bumped, Boyd down a little bit. But it's like you got like 20% of the targets going, 15 to 20% to Uzomah, 10 to 15% to Boyd. Then you got 25%, to Higgins this last week, and you got like 20%, to Chase. So they're spreading it around a lot. But man, there is so much room for like a huge blow up game from one of these guys, though, moving forward, as long as the Bengals continue to stay more pass happy like they have been the last few weeks.
Kansas City Chiefs. We had some reports in the pregame, after CEH practice in full all week, and we basically got clarification that he was not going to be on a quote-unquote pitch count because of the injury, which must mean that Jerick McKinnon just took his freaking job. 70% snaps, 10 carries, 7 targets for McKinnon. Clyde, 30% snaps, 7 carries, and 2 targets. So, Dwain, Clyde made the most out of his carries there. I know we've all had fun with the meh nickname over the years, and clearly he hasn't quite, come through as the first round back that we've all seen, that we're hoping to see in the Andy Reid system. With all that said, man, it's Jerick McKinnon's world right now. We're just living in it. He looked good again, and seeing Clyde come back, not get the featured role after, let's face it, over the past 2 years, when he did come back from previous injuries, he really was just given his normal role without too much of a, easing in period. Jerick McKinnon, RB1 with the Chiefs, Dwain. How about that?
Yeah, I think it's going to stick, man. I mean, Darrell Williams was out, right, with his toe injury, so that could be something to think about. But I just think McKinnon gives them something. We talked about this last week that you really don't get from Edwards-Helaire and Williams, and that's really that you kind of get that explosive play ability. You get that, home run threat that McKinnon can provide. McKinnon wasn't really able to get that going and reproduce what he had done in the wild card round, where 33% of his touches went for 10 yards or more. He didn't have any of those in the rush on the ground this past week. But he's still he's the guy that they can keep out there on passing downs, keep him out there on early downs. You don't really have to tip your hand as to what you may be thinking that you're going to do, depending on which back you have on the field. So I do think this is going to be McKinnon's job, through the rest of, the postseason, assuming, right, all 3 guys, are healthy and available. Obviously, if something happens with McKinnon, we probably go more back to what we saw earlier in the season with Williams handling the passing down role and Edwards-Helaire handling the early down duties.
Before you all just say, I'm done with Clyde Edwards-Helaire, it's never going to happen again, look at those free agents in this backfield, though. Each of Jerick, Darrell, and Derek Gore, he's an exclusive rights free agent. But all these guys are on the market, ahead of March. So we will see how the Chiefs kind of address that running back room. Clearly, making this switch when they're not thrilled about what Clyde Edwards-Helaire has brought to the table. And as we've seen from basically everyone other than Clyde Edwards-Helaire, this can still be an awfully fantasy-friendly role. Just real quick with the routes in case KC. Tyreek Hill, Travis Kelce each had 46. Number 2 wide receiver, though, was Byron Pringle with 43 routes. Then we had Jerick at 38, Demarcus Robinson 35, and in a distant 4th was Mecole Hardman with just 19 routes. So it was good. He busted that awesome touchdown run. I think the next gen stats on the replay was saying he had like a 1.9% chance of scoring at the snap. So that was an awesome play, and he can do that. But right now, 3 wide receiver sets are Tyreek, Pringle, and Robinson. So keep that in mind.
Pringle is just a guy because if you're playing DFS this weekend in the championship round, you have to find these other guys. He's been very consistent. He is the third guy. Now out of the last 3 weeks, his routes have been 81%, 62%, and 82%. But most impressive, targets, 21%, 18%, 18%. So he's really the third guy. It's Tyreek Hill. It's Travis Kelce. We know one of those two is probably going to lead the team in targets every week. We know McKinnon's going to get involved as well underneath. But Pringle really is the next guy. Mecole Hardman's, his routes are too far down. He is getting more work on the ground. He's got 5 carries in the last 3 games. So I think they're trying to take a page out of San Francisco's book. Hey, is there a way we can get, especially with all of the deep coverages that the Chiefs face, all the 2-shell packages, all that kind of stuff. What are ways that they can try to really lure the defense into coming in closer? How do they get playmakers with speed, the ball underneath? And one way for Hardman, since he can't seem to run the right route that Patrick Mahomes won, is just hand him the ball. And so Hardman's rushing attempts have gone from 4% to 6% to 10% over the last 3 games.
Dudes, for his career, Mecole doesn't include the playoffs, but 5.9 yards per carry, 9.6 yards per target. I get it. He's not going out there and being Tyreek Hill, but who is Tyreek Hill other than Tyreek Hill? If you give Mecole the ball in design fashions, usually good things happen. And yes, shout out to Byron Pringle, 5 touchdowns in his past 5 games. Dude's always out there playing with a chip on his shoulder. All right, Dwayne, 49ers here. We got Kittle. We got Ayuk. Those are our every down skill position players. Debo, too, but it is interesting to see just as a small route disparity here because Kittle last week, 22 routes, Ayuk 21. Debo, the small step down to 19. Then we had Jawan Jennings at 15, Kyle Juszczyk 13, Elijah Mitchell 12. We kind of saw, okay, when the 49ers offense hasn't scored a touchdown in the last 80 minutes of game action, you're not going to see too many big numbers from anyone. At least we saw George Kittle seem like they were actively going out of their way trying to design him some more of these targets. Because going to last week, Dwayne, we talked about how he was still out there on basically, I think it was 24, 25 dropbacks last week. He just wasn't getting as involved as we saw, aside from one bad drop in that Packers game. George Kittle, still very much one of the best receiving tight ends in the game, and it was good to see the 49ers seemingly remember that and try to actively get him that ball quicker.
Yeah, he was one kind of brain fart away. He had that one ball hit him right in the pads. Yeah. And I don't know. They may not have caught him on that. He had an angle to the end zone. They may have caught. He's just so good. It's
Kittle. He might have stiff armed 3 guys anyway. So
exactly. So that's the thing. I was really hoping for that because I used him in my flex a lot. This weekend. He just barely missed that. But to your point with Kittle, they continue to feed him, especially whenever they get into these games where they're facing against zone coverage. And so this last weekend, when you look at Kittle, his target share was up to, 35% this past week. Targets per route run was 27%. The 35% led the team. And if you look at Kittle versus zone coverage, like we talked about it last week on the season, he leads the team in targets per route run versus zone. He's really tied with Deebo Samuel there. So, Kittle continues to be, a big problem whenever he sees the zone coverage. And got a new thing, Ian, average depth of route. We've had average depth of target. So digging into all this data that I want to look at in the offseason, this first pass at it, folks. So these may not be the exact official numbers. I'm working with the data team on hey, how do we get rid of these kind of plays, this kind of stuff. But right now, looking at Ayuk, he's clearly the guy working downfield, 10.2. George Kittle is really more underneath, intermediate, 5.8 is his average depth of route run. And then you have Deebo Samuel, is right at an 8. And then you have Jawan Jennings and all these other guys. They don't really have big enough a role to talk about. But those are the 3 primary. Kittle's the most shallow. Then you got Deebo, intermediate. And you got Brandon Ayuk continuing to work deep, which makes sense. That's why when we talk about Ayuk, right, when do you play Ayuk? When you're playing against a man-heavy team. We'll get more into the matchups later this week. But just wanted to throw some new data at the folks.
I like that concept. Mr.
Plus, it's adore. You have to love a stat that reads adore, ADOR.
Adore. Shout out Jim Morrison. All right.
There you
with
go.
the backfield. Elijah Mitchell now up to, and this was I was just trying to add up as you were saying a lot of that, 274 touches this season without a drop or a fumble. Every time like I tweet this, someone's like, damn it, Ian, like you jinxed him. I've been tweeting this for like 2 months now, and I have not jinxed the guy yet. So I'm knocking on wood, not trying to do anything other than praise what Elijah Mitchell has been able to accomplish this year. But yes, he continues to be the featured back, 72% snaps, 17 carries, and 4 targets. Look, Devo's going to get his 10 carries and 4 targets himself. We also had Juszczyk getting 2 carries. But Dwayne, I mean, this is like where beggars can't be choosers for Elijah Mitchell. We're getting usually 20 combined carries and targets, you know, every single week with him as the lead back for the 49ers. And I don't really see that going away anytime soon. Now, we need to see what they do with some of these guys, Jeff Wilson, Raheem Mostert, and unrestricted free agents. But at least for the rest of this playoff run, it's absolutely the Elijah Mitchell show. And, you know, I don't think we can just be assuming Trey Sermon is going to have a bigger role than he did last year. How many years did we spend with Rashad Penny and Chris Carson? I understand it finally kind of got proven right at the end of 2021.
We'll talk about that one in a minute.
Like draft capital, yes, it helps. But, you know, when we have like draft capital helps us predict what we don't know. But when we all of a sudden find out what the pecking order is, probably time just to trust that.
Yeah. I mean, and look, here's the thing. Like, if it was a typical offense, like we would more worry, but we would probably care more, right, about the carries that Debo is taking away. You know, if you look at him over the last few weeks, he's been right around 25%. He was at a season high this last weekend, 33% on his 10 carries. But the 49ers continue to be very committed to running the ball. So that really helps, you know, that helps offset that. So if you look at the 49ers since week 12, they're 31st in dropback rate or dropbacks per game in regulation. So just removing overtime to kind of level the playing field, only 29.9. But they're running the ball a ton. So since week 12, they're plus 7% rushing versus the NFL average when they're trailing by 4 or more points. Whenever they're within 3, they're plus 5% versus the NFL average. And when they're leading by 4 or more points, they're plus 4% in rushing rate versus what we see with the rest of the NFL. So in all game scripts, they continue to pound the rock. They're the last pound the rock team remaining in the playoffs. Everyone else has really moved to more or throwing. Well, the Rams are balanced. Chiefs are pass heavy. The Bengals, I would say, are pass balanced. And then you have the 49ers, which are truly run heavy. So
they're taking it to a new level, man. Like a brand new level. I wrote an article that kind of wasn't really meant to slander Jimmy G. We've talked throughout the year about how, like, you know, style points don't matter. The dude's second yards per attempt in the league. That's the ultimate goal of a passing play. But man, nobody in playoff history that we have has been asked to do less in their offense. And like you were talking about those dropbacks, our PFF database goes back to 2006. And of all the guys with at least 3 playoff starts, Garoppolo, 18.7 dropbacks per start. He's the only guy under 25, man. Tannehill is at 25. Mark Sanchez is at 27.2. Like, everyone else is over 30. So it's one of these things, man, where like, okay, everyone got their Aaron Rodgers vaccine jokes off Saturday night. That's fine and dandy. But if they didn't block those 2 kicks, man, that discourse is undoubtedly going to be, how the hell was Trey Lance not starting in this game? Again, man, 80 straight minutes and they haven't scored a touchdown. And I know we had some drops. The Kittle drop, the Juwan Jennings kind of had a drop like right after that. I even think there was a third one in there. But let's not pretend like that Jimmy G not getting the most out of his receivers is this like new, or like it's a continuous problem, I should say, because we know he's been getting bailed out by some of the best yak monsters in the league. Trent Williams, PFF's offensive MVP. Like, it's just one of these things, man, where we once again see quarterback wins like becoming this thing that really hides the fact that, you know, in these playoffs particularly, Jimmy G's been terrible. Those same that same group, 34 quarterbacks since 2006 with at least 100 playoff dropbacks. He is 31st in QB rating, 29th in PFF passing grade, 18th in yards per attempt. So not only has Jimmy G not been doing much in the playoffs, but unlike the regular season, he hasn't even been efficient with what he's been asked to do.
Yeah, I mean, look, I'm kind of torn. Like, the 49ers beat the Cowboys, so it's like I don't mind seeing them keep moving forward, but like I don't want to see Jimmy in the Super Bowl. Like, I want to see another good, you know, and I know Stafford's had his issues, but I'd rather see the best matchup, like where we know we have 2 quarterbacks. At least we've seen Stafford, you know, he can get off. We know that, right? And so I don't really want to see another Jimmy G Super Bowl. Like, if it was Trey Lance, I might feel differently, but man, you know what, this also really worries me, Ian. Like, what the hell's going on with Trey Lance? Like, I mean, how bad must Trey Lance look right now? How far is he in a doghouse that he can't get out there with Jimmy looking like this?
And
like
playing hurt, which, hey, give Jimmy G credit. The dude's always playing through some injury, and he continues to do so. Like, other than obviously 2018, 2020, where it was just, of the season-ending variety. Like, even 2019, when he was coming back from the ACL injury, we saw him playing through various ailments throughout the way. So, not questioning the guy's toughness by any stretch. It's just really a reality, man, that, again, this offense, I just think that, instead of at the end of the game, setting out these like, oh, people wanted Trey Lance to be the starter. It's like, yeah, because their team traded 3 first-round picks for the guy. Like, this isn't, like, it's being made out to be like, shame on all of us for not wanting Jimmy G there. Like, look at the freaking team that did all this in the first place. So, yeah, man, maybe they will continue to have Stafford and company's number. Win is a win, but I think we're so used to giving the quarterback the bulk of the award because on most the bulk of the recognition, because on most teams, the quarterback deserves the bulk of the recognition. Yeah. With this being a unique team, how about we give Debo, give Trent Williams, those guys, the majority of the credit. Now, final usage thing, fun rant there, Dwayne, that we can't really get to.
I love it. It's okay.
During the end season. Great day to be great. With the Rams, Cam Akers. Those fumbles sucked, but he is dominating usage. 81% snaps, 24 carries, 3 targets. Sony Michel, 19% snaps, 1 carry, 2 targets. Still not seeing Darrell Henderson back in action. This is where it's going to get interesting, Dwayne, because the Cam Akers, like, I would love to see, I think some sites do this. I know Ryan McDowell's sent out some tweets before of just like ADP from week to week, because Cam Akers must have been on the dynasty fly before last week. And then he gets this usage, which, hey, this is fantastic stuff. Like this, if he could get 80% snaps for the entire year as the Rams RB1, we're talking about a first-round fantasy football pick. Easy. But Dwayne, if we see next week happen and it goes from this to split because of the 2 fumbles and like the general lack of efficiency, this is going to be one of the biggest like just headaches to try to figure it out the entire offseason.
Man, I'm sold. Like, I don't care about the fumbles. Like, I'm not going to worry about it. It might impact him this next week. And look, I mean, Akers hasn't been that great. Like, his missed tackles forced, per rush this past week, only 8%. Yards after contact, only 1.79. 0 carries over 10 yards, so no explosive plays in the running game. Yards per route run were okay, but like nothing special. So, I mean, Akers really is just getting his feet under him. But what the coaches are doing with him just shows me. And look, we've seen it. Like, we already saw when they moved away from Darrell Henderson to Sony Michel. Right. I mean, now Darrell Henderson, yes, he was battling injuries, but I'm not that worried about Darrell Henderson going into next year. I think it's going to be pretty much Cam Akers. I think you're going to see Henderson get to play, some of the passing downs. We could even see that this weekend if we get Darrell Henderson back. But for me, like at this point, it's just like, look, this is Akers' backfield. And this is where it was probably headed this season before the injury.
Yeah. I mean, 46 carries, 106 yards on the ground. It has been rough. But at the same time, like, we're not seeing Sony and obviously not Henderson because he hasn't been playing. It's not like these guys have actually gone in and done a lot more with it. Like, that was kind of like the debut that Akers had in week 18 against the Niners. 5 carries, 3 yards, and Sony's the one putting forward the, sub 50-yard dud on all those touches.
Yeah, Akers was 23.8 in expected points this past weekend. He only put up 9.8, so he was minus 14. That's the worst in the league. But like, that tells me, and we know because we see the utilization, like if Akers comes up anywhere near, if he or McKinnon for whatever reason next week people are just not on them, in this championship round, it's hard to not be on someone. You only have 4 teams, but I will probably be for sure overweight versus the field on those guys. My guess is they're going to come in a little bit low just because people do a lot of box score watching.
Just quickly on the routes, everyone's king Cooper Kupp, obviously the lead guy, but as we've seen with some of the complimentary stuff, they have been rotating a little bit. But in these last few weeks, it really just has been Van Jefferson and OBJ flanking Kupp in 3 wide receiver sets. Our favorite guy, Ben Skowronek, out there just for one route. And Dwayne, this shocked me. I think I was only looking, maybe I looked at a different site to find this out. It's not Ben Skowronek, it's Bennett Skowronek.
Yeah, it's Bennett.
Yeah, I've been calling him Ben, I think. So my apologies to Bennett and the entire Skowronek family with that one. Also, Kendall Blanton for 4 routes out there.
If he ever tuned in and heard how we pronounce his last name, he probably wouldn't care less that you called him Ben.
Dude's going to be like, the guy with tits in his last name is out here trying to clown me. What the hell is going on?
Exactly.
Cam Akers, 24 routes. Tony Michel, 11. I don't think there's too much to take away from that. I was just trying to be a goofball with the Bennett stuff. So, Dwayne, let's get on to some running back free agency talk. Now, we both, unbeknownst to each other, just happened to grind out running back free agency articles last week. We kind of took different approaches. I tried to look through all the teams with free agents that, we're obviously going to be hearing about here in March, and looking at kind of the available situations. And from there, I kind of analyzed like what can we expect for the running back in these offenses. You kind of took more of a player-driven approach. So I think we're going to combine these pretty nicely here, go team by team, and then we'll kind of discuss what to expect and just the general upside of who we're actually dealing with. So with that said, let's start things off with the Arizona Cardinals. Both James Conner and Chase Edmonds are unrestricted free agent. Even Jonathan Ward's an exclusive rights free agent. I would be very surprised if they enter the season with Eno Benjamin as their number one back. So, hey, if they bring back Conner and Edmonds, we're probably going to be ranking them both as low-end RB2s as they were, because as much as dual-threat quarterbacks historically don't really enable the fantasy-friendly running backs, Cardinals have been a little bit of an exception with Kyler Murray. Since he's been there, their running backs ranked 17th in targets and 4th in carries inside the 5-yard line. So that's usually the concerns we have for these dual threat quarterbacks. But the Cardinals, they've involved Edmonds specifically enough as a receiver, and they're just wanting to give the rock to these guys inside the 5-yard line that I don't think it's as big of an issue as, say, Baltimore or one of these other situations. So really, Dwayne, this is a situation where if they only bring back one of Conner or Edmonds, might be unlikely, we're looking at someone that is going to be warranting a potential top 12, top 15 pick in fantasy drafts of most shapes and sizes.
Yeah, especially if it's James Conner. If Conner lands in any situation where he has the potential to be the every down guy, so the way that I, handled, the article that I wrote up, and folks can find it, on the site, I just broke it down into the top 8 backs heading into free agency, and I bucketed them, right? So you have what I would consider to be the every down options, the complementary passing down options, and then the early down options. And it's really just based on like the underlying metrics as well as their historical utilization. Like, have they ever been using those kind of roles? So it's not we can't always use the past to predict the future, but like sometimes it's the best thing that we have. So trying to pull all those things together was really my goal, and trying to take like a comprehensive look at these players. But James Conner really, the guy came to the very top of the list. He had the fifth highest PFF rushing grade at running back, overall grade, 82.9 out of the 68 backs with at least 200 snaps played. He was great in the passing game, where he had the 3rd highest receiving grade, and then he also had the 2nd highest pass blocking grade for running back. So he's a guy that you can truly leave out there. We've seen coaches trust him in that scenario in the past, and now, the grades are there. So he's been good on the ground. He's been good as far as pass pro. He's been good as a receiver out of the backfield. Entering his age 27 receiver year, he's nothing phenomenal about his underlying efficiency. If you look at his missed tackles forced versus the league average over the last 3 years has been 17%. He's always right around that. He's right at the average. The last 2 years he's been a 0.21 and a 0.20. Yards after contact, he's slightly below the league average. Explosive rush rate also right around the league averages. So but look, league average, this is the NFL. So average isn't necessarily a bad thing. The biggest thing, is that the coaches trust him. And we've seen it this year. Conner posted RB1, RB17, RB7, RB12, RB2, and RB1 finishes in games with Chase Edmonds playing less than 5% of the snaps. So Conner is my favorite guy. Anywhere he lands, if we think he has a shot to be an every down back, for one, or who knows, if it could just be for one more season, kind of like what we're seeing right now with Leonard Fournette, how he got the 1-year deal with Tampa Bay. But Conner's the main man. I think Edmonds, if he lands somewhere else, most likely is a complimentary back. He could end up being more if obviously there's an injury on the team. We've seen him step up and have these big games and show that he's capable. But I think at this point, we really probably have to consider him as more of a complimentary type player.
And just realize, people, in Arizona, this has been a spot, whether it's David Johnson, Kenyon Drake, Conner, or Edmonds, when these running backs have been left alone, we have seen that legit 90% snap roll that it's hard to find pretty much anywhere else. The Atlanta Falcons, could be losing a true GOAT. Cordero Patterson is an unrestricted free agent. Look, I understand if they're not going to try to pay the guy a bunch of big money. He is getting a little bit long in the tooth, but as we saw from 31-year-old playmaker last year, 11 total touchdowns in an offense that was pretty mad for the entire year. There is some opportunity to be had, particularly considering Mike Davis, with him being next man up. Like we just saw last year, they do not trust Mike Davis as their feature back. Even when Patterson was hurt, Mike Davis couldn't even take over the backfield to himself. So Atlanta, one of just 9 teams with fewer than $3.5 million devoted to their backfield ahead of next season. I mean, Dwayne, this is one of those where like if they go ahead and if it's like a Najee Harris type situation where they use a first or second round pick, whether you want to call it irresponsible or not on the position, this could be an offense that gives a 300 to 400 touch workload because we've seen Arthur Smith give that to Derrick Henry before. So I think, this could go one of two directions. Maybe they just decide to not prioritize it. It's Mike Davis and a couple other guys in a committee. We saw that for, portions of this year, but based on Smith's history, man, if we can get that 3-down workhorse with the big contract, Atlanta could be one of these underrated situations where a running back just thrives. Because remember, you don't need to be a great offense to have a great fantasy running back. Just look at freaking James Robinson and the Jaguars 2 years ago. Numerous other examples that we've had throughout time. Cordero Patterson, literally last year, man, on the Falcons. Like we don't need to look far to find these examples. We'll see who it ends up being in Atlanta. Could be a nice spot.
Dude, Cordero Patterson was Deebo Samuel before Deebo Samuel was Deebo Samuel.
Thank you. And Percy Harvin had to crawl so CPAC could walk so Deebo could fly.
So, I think there's going to be interest in Patterson, whether it's in Atlanta or not. I think now there's maybe enough of a blueprint because what we've seen with Deebo, what we've seen with Arthur Smith. Now, look, it takes a special kind of player to be a receiver that can play running back. Not just anybody. So it's not just like, oh, let's find the next Cordero Patterson or find the next Deebo Samuel. I don't think there's going to be, those aren't just going to come along all the time. But these are, Patterson has shown that he could play that role. So I think you could easily see him, if he went to a team that runs that West Coast smash mouth kind of style like Shanahan runs. So you could see the Jets, you could see, we'll have to see what happens, in Minnesota. Right now that's Clint Kubiak, but they run that style of offense, but we'll have to see what happens with some of these teams and where these different coordinators land. But I would be interested to see Patterson land in a spot like that or reunite with Arthur Smith. Look, you can't ignore what he was able to do as a receiver. He was the number 5 graded overall PFF running back at an 82, number 2 receiving grade, among the running backs at a 91.4, and he had a 2.25 yards per route run. That's the third most at the position. And honestly, when you're grading it, that's not even really fair because a lot of those times he was lining up out wide or in the slot, wasn't get to line up, as a running back. So the work he's doing is against better coverage than what most backs face. So for example, McCaffrey grades as number 1 in yards per route run, but all those are coming out of the backfield. Whereas CPAT's move, you can truly move him all around like that movable chess piece and do all these different things that you may want to do. So coordinator matters a lot for me for CPAT. I want to see him land somewhere with an innovative play calling mind, someone that we know kind of likes to run a lot of the jet sweep type stuff, likes to, utilize some of the larger formations, different things like that. If I see that right type of landing spot, I'll definitely be very high on Cordero Patterson versus if he just lands in an offense. You don't want him landing in on an offense that wants to just drop back and throw all the time. I don't think. I don't think that's going to work. Who knows? Maybe it could. If you just got him lined up in the backfield every play and you're we're going to pass the ball 65% of the time, CPAC could probably live in that environment. But I think he's still going to be probably looked at as more of a complementary player, not a player that can take over in every – not that he couldn't, but I don't think, going into his age 31 season, I don't think anybody's going to want to just load him up with carries.
Put him in San Fran. Why the hell not? Who else knows how to use the guy better?
Man, him and Deebo doing that together. Of course, that would drive us nuts with projections.
I know. It wouldn't be best case for his fantasy stock. That's what I have an article coming out on Wednesday, looking at the wide receiver best landing spots. And I saw some, I won't throw the guy under the bus, but someone was saying the Eagles are the number 1 landing spot for some of these wide receivers. And I'm okay. Mm-hmm. Yes, they could use a wide receiver upgrade, but why the hell would we want any of these wide receivers to go to an offense with a run-first quarterback and pretty much a cemented top 2 already in the passing game? So much of it does come down to available opportunity.
The offense would have to change for us to be excited about that.
We'll talk about we'll talk about wide receivers a little bit more next week. Keeping on the topic at hand, Denver Broncos, Melvin Gordon, unrestricted free agent. Dwayne, we don't need to spend too much time on this because I think it's simple enough. In your 2022 fantasy football ranks, under the assumption that Melvin Gordon takes his talents elsewhere, Javonte Williams is the overall RB2. That's the ceiling we're looking at here, and that's before maybe even getting one of these Aaron Rodgers, Russell Wilson, Deshaun Watson type crown jewels at quarterback.
Totally agree. I mean, that's where I've got Javonte right now in my ranks as number 2, just based off of we've hit on a lot of that stuff, a week or two ago. Look, Gordon, like if he stays, it's a problem for Javonte Williams because despite the fact that he's getting up there, so he'll be at 1,503 attempts going into next year, and we know around 1,500 attempts, that's when you hit anytime the drop off could just happen. We've seen it so often. Derrick Henry's going to be facing that next year. Not saying it's going to happen, but we just know that these players, they do have a limited shelf life at running back, and so Gordon's going to be running into that, heading into next season. But if he returned to the Broncos, he's probably going to see at least 30 to 40% of the work. I would still see Javonte Williams growing his role, but it would probably really be a nuisance. And on the other side of this, for Gordon. I haven't really graded as best fit, as an early down presence, but we know in his past, every down has been in his bag, so if he landed in the right place where the incumbent starter was not that strong, I think Gordon's going to be a valuable mid to late round pick. When I say mid to late, I'm talking 8th, 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th round, getting into those ranges, kind of the same place he was going this year, depending on where he lands. We could see a stretch of the season where Gordon is an every down back. So a lot of it just will depend, on where he lands. Most of his metrics, he's under the league average at this point in his career. The missed tackles force, he's been really good over the last 2 years. He's plus 0.07 and plus 0.05%. Yards after contact, a little better than league average. Explosive plays, not even real. He's below league average in that area. But again, we've seen him play the every down role in the past, so he could do that again somewhere else in the right situation.
And I think some of these, quote unquote issues would be less magnified if he wasn't sharing a backfield with freaking Javonte Williams and then Austin Eckler before that. He's had some great players right there alongside him that I think has caused this idea that Gordon, has been anything other than at least an average.
If Sean Payton stayed in New Orleans, which he's got 2 more years left.
Gordon would be the perfect
complement to Kamara because
I like that call.
Because he's fine as a back in the screen game, which we've seen Mark Ingram do, but he's just got more left, right, than what Mark Ingram has got at this point. So I think Gordon would be a perfect fit in a situation like that because look, we've seen the Saints; they don't really want to grind Kamara into the ground. And I don't blame them. And so I think you do need a complementary weapon there. So I think that could be a fit.
I'm going to fly through these next 4 and we'll pick it up with the Patriots. I think we've either already talked about these teams or there's just kind of too much unknown to really have major opinions right now. With the Houston Texans, though, both David Johnson and Royce Freeman are unrestricted free agents. Obviously, they parted ways with Mark Ingram and Phillip Lindsay during the year. That leaves only soon to be 32-year-old Rex Burkhead as the really last remaining running back. Just note, he has never handled even 150 touches in a season. We'll see.
And a new coaching staff.
Coaching staff. So that's what I'm saying. Way too much unknown here, but this is a backfield that could have, like I said, one of these high price free agents or a high round draft pick. This is a spot where we could expect them to see, a true 3-down role sooner rather than later. With the Chiefs, mentioned this before, but yes, Darrell Williams and Jerick McKinnon are free agents. Derek Gore is an exclusive rights free agent. With a lot of these types of players, I think the backups are a lot easier to bring back than, your flashy, just super high price wide receiver types. So I'm not expecting all these guys to leave by any stretch. Just realize if they do, Clyde Edwards-Helaire, whether you like it or not, could be in line for a nice workload, potentially at a cost after everything that's happened during his first 2 years. With the Rams, Sony Michel, unrestricted free agent. Dwayne, right now, man, I would expect Sony not to be back in Los Angeles, given what the Rams now know about Cam Akers' return from the Achilles injury. I think Sony's probably done enough during his stint as a starter to maybe go earn an opportunity elsewhere. Do you have any major thoughts on Sony potentially taking his talents elsewhere? I mean, I think really this year, to his credit, because, it was always kind of the coming out of Georgia, I don't mean this as a slight on Nick Chubb, but like I always kind of thought of Sony as more of like the explosive guy. And maybe some of this was Chubb still coming back from his own knee injury that he suffered in college. But seeing Sony basically evolve into more of this like early down, grinder, just, put him in the I formation and let him waste away. In New England, that wasn't how I remembered him at Georgia. It seemed like in the Rams, not that he emerged as Todd Gurley 2.0 or anything, but he certainly seems like someone that could and can handle a 3-down role if someone wants to put it on his plate.
Yeah, I put him in. I think he could do it, like we've seen him do it, right? But just based on what we saw when he was in that role, I think he's really probably the better fit as an early down type guy. Like if you look at his PFF receiving grade, it was a 44. That's the second worst of all the free agent running backs. His pass blocking grade wasn't terrible, 64.9. But he just doesn't add like a lot of upside to your passing game. As somebody that you're really like, oh wow, I could check it down to Sony here and he could go for like 15. It's like, oh, I'll check it down to Sony and he'll get 2. It just hasn't really worked out for him. But I'm with you. Like whenever I was looking at him and Chubb, back in the day in Georgia, like Michelle, I don't want to say he was playing full on like a Swift role, but it was more reminiscent of the DeAndre Swift role than what we see Sony Michel doing now. But this could be, injuries, carries, all those things starting to take a toll, on Sony Michel. So I mean, he's been in the league a little bit now, so I do think there's the potential for him to play an every down role. And we'll have to see where he lands, but my guess is he's really going to be more of an early down guy.
With the Miami Dolphins, both Philip Lindsay and Malcolm Brown are unrestricted free agents. We also got Salvin Ahmed as an exclusive rights free agent. Hell, Duke Johnson's a free agent as well. Patrick Lair's a restricted free agent. Everyone is basically a free agent in this backfield. Who knows if Tua's going to be back under center. Still need to think about the new coaching staff as well. Offensive line is obviously a joke. But with all that said, maybe just maybe if they do decide on one single back, there is opportunity to be had in that Miami backfield. Here's an interesting one, Dwayne, and kind of similar to Kansas City. If I had to bet, I don't think these guys leave anyway, so maybe it's a moot point. But in New England, both James White and Brandon Bolden are unrestricted free agents. Let's have fun here and assume that they are not back and that we get to have a Damon Harris backfield where, okay, he's not going to get absolutely all of the early down back with Stevenson there. But if we could have it just Harris and Stevenson in an offense that, hey, Mac Jones year 2, I think they could again be an above average scoring group. Where would you kind of be ranking Harris and Stevenson? Because this is a run heavy enough offense to maybe foster 2 fantasy friendly running backs.
Yeah, if we could get it down to 2, that would be great. I worry that we still wouldn't be able to trust it, even if James White and Brandon Bolden left. Remember, Brandon Bolden's just a special teams player that turned into the passing down back.
Right.
So like it could be a J.J. Taylor thing. They could bring in someone else. They really have historically liked to use 3 backs. There's not a lot of coaches where, we look at coaching schemes, we look at these things and they matter, but with some situations, it's like, you look back, you see the players they had, you're like, oh, it just makes sense. They wanted to get all 3 guys involved. With this team, like they really do like to have, they're one of the few coaching staffs where you see this long-standing trend. It's almost like the Bruce Arians and the big slot receiver, right? Like there are some coaching trends where you're like, wow, that's pretty strong. You just got to go with it. So I'd be very interesting to see who lands around. But if we did get it down to just a 2-player backfield, my guess is we would see Stevenson expand into more of a passing down role. You probably see Damian Harris take about half of the rushing attempts. Maybe you see Stevenson take 30 to 40%, but if he also got to pick up all the passing down work, then I certainly think that both guys could be viable in fantasy. And look, like if Stevenson were to grow like in that receiving role, it's not like, the Patriots pretty much, they just spread the ball around to all these receivers. There's no one that's really demanding, these heavy targets per route run type looks that we would like to see, but maybe Stevenson, since no one else is doing it, like, we know he can make plays. Does he have a chance to really develop into a player that could see 15 to 20% of the targets? If he did that, yeah, both of these guys would be inside our top 24.
We're going to rank Harris higher than Stevenson, but who do you think is going to have the higher ADP? I bet Stevenson.
Man, he could. There was a lot.
People are obsessed with him.
They are. People. And look, I like the guy, but no, sure. I mean, like half the stuff I see posted is a perfectly block play, and Stevens just running for a touchdown, like the preseason one. These guys, people are like, I told you. I'm like, dude, he just actually only did his job, and that's all he did. Now, to Stevenson's credit, like he's been more than that down the stretch, but man, just watching Harris, like he just runs with such, tenacity. I don't know what the best way to explain it is, but like he's bringing heat, on every carry. So I think they're both good players, and I don't want to like be forced into liking one over the other, but I know we will. I tend to lean towards what you're saying because we also just like we naturally all want the next thing. Look, I remember when Damian Harris was a cool late round pick, but we're moving on. That was last year, and now it's Stevenson. But I think you would have to say if it got down to those two and we had to make an educated guess about which guy was going to take over the passing down work, I think we would probably both agree it'd be Stevenson. So in that case, in PPR formats, there could be a legitimate reason to still consider, putting Stevenson over even Harris.
I don't see Harris being more than a couple spots ahead of Stevenson, wherever we end up having them ranked. And maybe they're like right next to each other. But I just think that it's going to be a, different positions. But these types of situations, your Debo versus Ayuk, preseason stuff. When we see this growing disparity and we kind of look at the usage between them, it's like, well, that's actually a lot closer. I think we'll be better off more times than not just taking the discount. Before we get to the Jets, Seahawks, 49ers, Buccaneers, and the football team, I want to let you guys know that with DraftKings, you can download the DraftKings Sportsbook app now. Use promo code PFF and get 56-1 odds on any NFL team. Again, that's $5 and win $280 in free bets if your team wins. That's promo code PFF for 56-1 odds at DraftKings Sportsbook, an official sports betting partner of the NFL. Just note you must be 21 or older. New Jersey, Indiana, or Pennsylvania. Only new customers, only minimum $5 deposit, $1 wager required, one per customer. Restrictions apply. See DraftKings.com/sportsbook for details. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. Also, fun deal from our friends over at Western Southern. You have a chance to win a free catering up to $2,500 coordinated with your order from a restaurant near you, delivered on the day of the big game, February 13, 2022. For some reason with this, where, they can't quite use the name of the big game that we all know I'm talking about that concludes the NFL season, but you guys know what it is, and you can get, again, $2,500 up in catering. All you need to do is ask a question. That's it at westernsouthern.com/feast. One more time, it's westernsouthern.com/feast. Maybe you want to ask Chris Collinsworth what it's like to work with Al on Sunday Night Football, what it's like to be in the PFF offices, what he thinks of Dwain McFarland as a person. Whatever you want, you can ask those. And if you're watching on YouTube, check out the link in the description below. Remember, Western Southern, you can rest assured on game day. Also, shout out to PFF. That's right, our own company, and you can save 25% off any PFF subscription if you use code FANTASY. All locked article content, betting dashboards, NFL Green Line, which is up 27 units this year, our draft guide, and much more. Also, very happy to say that as soon as the Super Bowl is over, we are going to have an absolutely killer couple week stretch of Dynasty content coming your way. So get that PFF sub, use code FANTASY, and you can save 25% off and get all that again and much, much more. Finally, everyone, this Valentine's Day, which I guess that is coming up, got to start worrying about that. This V-Day, it's time to join the 4 million men worldwide who trust Manscaped, the leaders in below-the-waist grooming, with our exclusive offer. Go to manscaped.com and use code PFF for 20% off and free shipping. Again, it's 20% off and free shipping with the code PFF at manscaped.com. Join Cupid and shoot your arrow with Manscaped this Valentine's Day. All right, Dwayne, this next team, I think, was like a poster child this time last year for like, hey, if we get a rookie running back to go here, it's going to be one of the best situations in terms of raw opportunity. And we saw that pay off at various times throughout the year. I am speaking, of course, about the New York Jets. Now, the one issue for Michael Carter really taking on like a legit RB1 role was the presence of Tevin Coleman, who is now an unrestricted free agent. Maybe they bring him back on the cheap, but this is a situation where Tevin didn't really do enough there, I think, to warrant either a big, like, not an extension by any stretch, but even if he is back there, I could see Michael Carter, given that he was literally number one in missed tackles forced per touch in the entire league. He was the best running back with the Jets, and we saw him win the starting role from Coleman, not once, but twice. Even if he is back, I still think Carter could have the big jump. Now, Dwayne, we talked about this when Nathan Yonke was on the podcast this time last week about Michael Carter. He's still someone that I think you're, a little bit afraid of going too fully in on. With that said, if we make it through free agency and the draft and it's only Michael Carter and like Ty Johnson atop the depth chart, it's going to be hard to keep Carter out of that top 15.
Yeah, he's one of the more fragile guys because of like where he was drafted. Right. So there's a lot of opportunity in multiple rounds ahead of where he went this year for them to take another back, and knowing that they want to be a run balanced offense, for the Jets, I won't be surprised if they do that. I will not be surprised at all if they take a back in the first 2 or 3 rounds, like to go with Carter. I think either way, like Carter's a player that we're still going to like next year. Obviously, we're going to love him. Like if they don't find anyone else, that we would think would sit in front of him, or even potentially, create a timeshare. Although you could argue like Tevin Coleman, is a replacement back. So it's not like he really had someone that good stealing carries away from him, even though he did manage to overtake Coleman down the stretch. It's just an offense where we could see them want to continue to rotate the backs. But to your point, he did everything he needed to do. And we've seen what Carter can do in those games where you don't have Tevin Coleman available. You had a finish of RB7, RB1, then he had an RB35, let us down a little bit. But then he had another RB35. But look, you got that 1 and that RB7, that's enough. We know what kind of offense the Jets want to be. And if they can improve, as a team, and don't have to play from behind all the time, we could see more rushing attempts overall for that team, because I think they would like to look a lot more like the 49ers.
One team that we know always wants to run the ball as much as possible. Those Seattle Seahawks. Rashad Penny and Alex Collins are unrestricted free agents. I'm pretty sure the Collins ship has sailed regardless, just in terms of him really becoming this team's featured back ever again. But Rashad Penny, man, if you're a fantasy footballer like Dwain and I, you know all about Penny's end of the season stretch. But just to reiterate it for anyone that missed it, week 14, 16 carries, 137 yards, 2 touchdowns. Week 15, small dud, then finishes the year with 135 yards, touchdown, 170 yards, 2 touchdowns. Week 18, 190 yards and a score. Looked damn good doing it. If you make the sample size small enough, you were looking at the number 1 running back in yards after contact per carry from 2021. So, Dwain, I think the nightmare scenario is they bring back Penny, and lo and behold, our guy, I guess we could say our guy, I have nothing against him, Chris Carson is back and ready to go, because of course Pete Carroll had to take some of his time, after the season to say that Carson, is undergoing disc fusion neck surgery, but he expects him to be ready to go when training camp kicks off. So Pete's been, he called this originally a day-to-day injury. So good for you, Pete, just doubling down until, Chris Carson's probably, just an old man at this point. So overall thoughts on the Seattle Seahawks situation, Dwayne? It's touch and go with Pete, with Russell Wilson, and this running back room. But again, as we've seen with Carson over the years, and as we saw with Penny at the end of last year, this is a situation where we can get 20-plus touches on a weekly basis, and it's hard to find those in today's NFL.
Yeah, well, Penny's the back that I'm probably the most excited about seeing where he lands, this offseason, because if he lands anywhere where we think he could have 60% of the rushing attempts, you have to get excited. Now, look, Penny's got to stay healthy. This is the first season ever, man, he's eclipsed 100 rushing attempts. This guy just hasn't been injury prone. He has been injury prone. He has not been able to stay on the field. And that's in a 4-year career, so, that's pretty wild to say this is your first season to get over 100 rushing attempts. And it's typically been tied back to some sort of injury, not just a committee situation. The problem, though, teams are going to face, so even though he hasn't been available, of the backs that are here, just as a pure runner, he's the most explosive. His explosive rush rate now, I left 2020 out because he only had 40 snaps. But in 2018, 15%, that's plus 4.5 versus the league average. 2019, he was at 12%, that's plus 5.5. So the league average is 11.5%, 10.5%. Of plays go for 10 yards or more. In 2021, he was at 16%. So he's been well over that each of these seasons. Yards after contact, well over the league averages by plus 0.47, plus 0.19. This year, plus 1.59. So, he's been above the league average in those yards after contact stats every single year of his career as well. So, and if you look at the games where he's had at least 12 touches, just looking at his entire career, he's delivered, these are his PPR points, 16.8, 18.9, 26.7, 26.8, 6.4, there's a dud, but 19.5, 32.5, and 25. So every one of those has been 15 points or more, except for one, whenever he's just had at least 12 touches. So we know that the upside is there with Penny. Really can't wait to see where he lands. Kind of hope it's not here, to be honest. Yeah. Because the Seahawks offense, it's just the play volume, man. It's just so terrible. It's terrible for everyone involved. So very excited to see where Penny lands this offseason.
I just hope the man can stay a little bit healthy to start the year. I mean, each and every time, man, he fractures a finger before he takes his first NFL snap, and then he can't, really be beating out Carson. He has a late season knee strain. 2019 comes along. I remember he had this like really explosive touchdown run against the Steelers, and it was like, oh, okay, like here we go, Penny. Immediately gets a hamstring strain. Then he gets a freaking torn ACL later in the year when it finally looked like he was coming on. That ACL basically caused him to miss all but 3 games late in the 2020 season. Then 2021 comes along. We got the calf strain taking him out in September, numerous other issues throughout the year. Stay healthy, Penny.
Yeah, the other thing with him is early in his career, they actually did use him as a passing down back. He may not necessarily be a 2-down banger. Right now, I have him graded as an early down option, but just because we don't have quite enough data to say that we really know like his pass blocking grades and receiving grades, we don't know how stable those will be once he really gets more snaps. But I think it's potential. I mean, part of one of the things they really liked around Penny when they drafted him, which surprised a lot of like draftnik people, but they thought that he really had, he was good as a receiver out of the backfield. So I think there is potential for him to turn into an every down back. But again, like it's just all about staying healthy.
Next situation I want to talk about is the San Francisco 49ers, who have I'm looking at it right now. They are one of only 3 teams with fewer than $2 million devoted to their backfield ahead of next season. That is because both Raheem Mostert and Jeff Wilson are unrestricted free agents, and JaMychal Hasty is an exclusive rights free agent. Who knows, man? Could it just be the Elijah Mitchell show? Will Trey Sermon get a little bit more involved? Or will Kyle Shanahan do something like, I don't know, give Jerick McKinnon a 4-year, $30 million contract? Because that happened a few years ago. Like, Dwayne, I want to believe in Mitchell. He's been great. We've talked him up throughout the year. And he's more than just a product of the system. He has fantastic yards after contact numbers that aren't even being skewed by one big run. Like, he's been consistent. The stat I brought up again and again throughout this year, percentage of carries with at least 2 yards after contact on them. And he's been a top 5 guy throughout the season. So it's nothing against Mitchell, but Dwayne, if we see them make one serious, addition at this position, that is really going to, I think, cause Mitchell to go from being a fringe RB1 already to someone that we're going to have to take a long, hard look at, because, again, this is all based on him dominating the rush attempts. We know the targets aren't really coming there and haven't been throughout the year. Overall thoughts on Mitchell, and like, how willing are you to really take a stand on him in Dynasty? It just seems to me like this is a room that we've seen evolve again and again and again over the years, and to just assume that now Kyle's like, all right, we got Elijah Mitchell. I'm good at running back for the next, half decade. I'm not so sure I'm willing to make that jump.
Yeah, I'm not either. I would be selling Mitchell in Dynasty right now. As far as season long next year, based on what we know right now, which is not a lot, but we know that he has a really good shot at being the number 1 back next year, right? But again, like Trey Sermon could come back and play well. I pretty much like Mitchell over Sermon. I've kind of settled that in my head. I'm not going to totally write off Sermon. I do think, it was a terrible year, right? And it's all we have to react to. But the truth around Trey Sermon is probably better than what happened this last season. The biggest concern for Mitchell is just like what we talked about with Carter. What if they draft someone? If they draft someone in the first 3 rounds, like Mitchell's value will tank. Like it will go so far down just because of all the things you just said. We know that Shanahan's willing to use a committee. We know that he's willing to go hot hand. He's willing to go with the latest thing in his backfield. So with Mitchell right now, heading into it, I feel really good about him next year. He'll be a borderline RB1 for me, but still a lot to play out this offseason. How would you feel, Ian? What if because Raheem Mostert's not going to have a big market like at his age.
Bro,
but the 49ers
will be split if he comes back.
I think Raheem Mostert probably comes back to the 49ers. Then that becomes even a situation and so that kind of tells you how fragile like Elijah Mitchell's status is in our minds, that Raheem Mostert would worry us. I would project Mitchell to obviously be the lead back. But Mostert might be able to steal away more work than what we've seen from Jeff Wilson. Is
this me being an idiot again? Like when I was too worried about Marlon Mack to go all in on Jonathan Taylor. Are we making that mistake here?
Jonathan Taylor's very different. His college, his collegiate track record coming out was elite. We're talking about a guy that had nearly 2,000 yards rushing every year, right?
Second round pick versus 6th round pick. It's not a 1-for-1. I'm just wondering, the veteran, often injured starter, quote unquote, in quotation marks, the starter coming back. It's one of those things. I'm with you.
And I don't think we're saying, I was just throwing that out there as a hypothetical because we know like an early draft pick would really hurt Mitchell. Yeah, but I'm just saying the most likely thing to happen is they re-sign these guys. Like we know Jeff Wilson's been there all year and they haven't cared about him. Yeah. But Raheem Mostert, like just it causes enough pause like that I think we all know. It's just part of when you draft backs from Shanahan's backfield. You know the upside is huge, but you also just have to acknowledge that the risk is there, right? So if you're betting on like top 10 percentile outcomes, like, and you just want to go big, then great, go for it. And you're going to probably draft Mitchell and you'll be happy about it. But you just also know that like the floor is lower on some of these guys just because of the habits that we've seen or the tendencies that we've seen from Shanahan, through the years. It's not always that easy to lock down the lead role in this backfield. Look, like I said, I'm going to have him as a borderline RB1 right now, and I really like the player. But he's a guy I know we're going to have talking a lot about.
Well said, good sir. All right, two more, everyone. Tampa Bay Buccaneers, Fournette, Rojo, Gio, and Le'Veon Bell, all unrestricted free agents. Now, Dwayne, remember Bruce Arians a couple weeks ago? He's like, oh, Keyshawn Vaughn, man. I've always believed in him. It's you people that, haven't seen him as a 3-down back. What happened last week? Leonard Fournette plays 86% of the snaps. Giovanni Bernard, 12%. And that electric Keyshawn Vaughn that Bruce couldn't stop hyping up was a special teamer only. So seems awfully unlikely, Dwayne, that Keyshawn Vaughn is back there as the lead guy. With that said, he is currently the only guy under contract. I think the situation we're hoping for is just that they re-sign Leonard Fournette, and we once again have one of the most used running backs in all of football.
Yeah, we want Leonard Fournette with Tom Brady back.
There we go.
Because if it's Leonard Fournette with whoever else, a quarterback, right, that's going to be a big problem. Because let's face it, like we like Fournette, but he's not lived up to being the number 4 pick overall. Like he's a more versatile player than what people probably gave him credit for, and I think he's shown that this year. But his explosive rush rate, not good. Minus 3.5 in 2019. Minus 2.5 in 2021. Missed tackles forced per attempt, not good. Now he is solid in the yards after contact, but not what you would expect necessarily from a back of his size. So I think Fournette is, he's a solid player. Like he's above replacement probably for an NFL running back. But I think we really need a good situation. I do think that with Fournette, like he's probably not an every down back on every team. It's worked out that way in Tampa Bay, but I wouldn't necessarily be sold that he would be an every down back if he lands on another roster. I do think if they've got a really good passing down option, like he could give way and just really turn back into more of an early down runner. I think that's within the range of outcomes, more so for Fournette than what we've seen with James Conner. That's just really like risen above and beyond, not only getting the snaps, but playing great in the passing game. Not to say that I just think, James Conner is necessarily like a better running back than Fournette, but I just think as far as like his passing game ability, I feel a little better about Conner than I do Fournette.
Fair points all around. Final situation, Washington football team, J.D. McKissic, unrestricted free agent. Anyone that was a fantasy manager of Antonio Gibson last year knows just how big of a deal it can be when McKissic leaves the lineup. Dwayne, your 2022 ranks right now, you have Antonio Gibson, RB4 overall. That is under the assumption that McKissic will be taking his talents elsewhere. If McKissic comes back, where do you think Gibson falls to? Because looking at your ranks, I would kind of say he's going to go into that RB2 territory behind guys like Joe Mixon, maybe behind, probably behind a Cam Akers right there, probably more with a Nick Chubb, Dave Montgomery, because Gibson, man, when McKissic is there, he has, unfortunately, an early down grinder role in an offense that, who knows, man, right now it doesn't look good.
Yeah, I mean, here are the games where Gibson has played with McKissic. RB21, RB30, 17, 20. He had a 13. So when you score touchdowns, like you can manage to move that number up some. And that's the problem, right? You're playing an early down role in a bad offense. Like if you need Washington to really take a step forward.
I don't want both those things. We can live with early down in a good offense, but once we make it bad, that's when it gets tough.
Exactly. That's the problem. But like just to finish it out, like RB39, RB34, RB36. He did have an RB7 and RB23. But then like look at the games where you haven't had McKissic, RB6, RB36, and that was a game where you had to leave the game. RB4, RB18, RB6. So look, he's going to be a top 5 guy, like if McKissick is gone. And the thing with Gibson is we know that he can be a good receiving back. Like, look, he played receiver in college, so we know that part of his game is there. They just haven't been willing to unlock that yet. So yeah, that's a huge thing. Like if McKissick returns, it's absolutely what you just said. I'll have him more in that high-end RB2 range.
Dwain, fantastic stuff as always. That's going to wrap up this edition of the PFF Fantasy Football Podcast. Make sure you go on to pff.com. Dwain and I will each have plenty of goodness out there throughout the week. And of course, the rest of our team of analysts is supporting you as well. We'll continue to be grinding away on this podcast throughout the entire offseason. Dwain and I will be back Wednesday breaking down the conference championships. I'll also be back here with Andrew Erickson to go into some DFS and player prop goodness. And tentatively, going to get back into the 10 question game, trying to get those going more and more often. And I'm trying to get Nate List, who in my opinion is one of the better dynasty minds in the industry, over here to bark about some stuff for a bit at the end of the week. Anytime you start getting the Matt Kelly proteges and those player profiler folks in, you know you're in for a debate. So I think that'll be a fun one with Nate. Dwain, anything else you want to get off your chest, my friend?
No, man, this is a good show. Looking forward to the conference championship, preview that we'll have coming up later this week.
Great day to be great. For Dwain, I'm Ian. Thanks as always for tuning in. Until next time, take care, everybody.